Hello and welcome back to this video on Azure Automation. Great to see you've made it this far. Over the past few videos, we talked a lot about the concepts and DevOps, why do it, infrastructure as code, what value proposition it has. And then we looked at some of the tools available in the market to do infrastructure as code. But what we didn't look at is what the Microsoft toolset for doing infrastructure automation or IAC automation is. And in this video, we're going to talk about just that. Shouldn't come as a surprise that that framework is called Azure Automation. So in the past, most of the automation has been focused on enterprise data centers, IT operations, and IT processes. The movement to the cloud is opening a very, very interesting suite of scenarios. And the first one is heterogeneous cloud. You have Linux, you have Ubuntu, you have Mac, you have Windows, you have Hyper-V, you have VMware. Are your tools capable of automating across all these different heterogeneous environments? It's a common use case in a lot of the enterprises today. The other interesting use case it opens up is multi-vendor scenarios, where customers are using Amazon, they're using Google Cloud, they're using Azure, and they like their tools to run across all these different cloud providers without noticing the difference or having to do something specific to get it working. The other interesting scenario it's opening up is the hybrid cloud, where customers are continuing to use their on-prem infrastructure, but have created an extension of that into the cloud. And they want the tools that they use for automation to work across on-prem in the complexities of the on-prem itself, but as well as in the cloud. There's a massive push towards self-service IT. There's a massive push towards self-provisioning infrastructure. And of course, you can't rule out DevOps. Customers don't just want tools that enable DevOps. Customers want tools that accelerate DevOps. Now, the old ways of management do not necessarily work at the scale of cloud. Modern cloud needs modern management. So let's look at how Azure Automation addresses all of these unique suite of automation scenarios, as well as not only enables DevOps, but accelerates DevOps. So the first thing to highlight here is that the Azure Automation is a service offering within Azure. It's a hosted managed service, so you don't need to set up any infrastructure yourself in order to get started with it. The other thing to highlight here is that it helps you automate the operational tasks that you have within the organization. It gives you an interface to script, test, execute all the operational tasks that are part of your application lifecycle management process for server provisioning and server configuration. Server provisioning and server configuration, these are the two keywords. When I'm talking about server provisioning, I'm talking a lot about IaaS, infrastructure as a service, whether that infrastructure as a service is hosted in Azure, or whether it's on-prem, or whether it's in Amazon or any other cloud provider. Azure Automation simply integrates with all cloud providers as well as on-prem. It also gives you a way of authoring the scripts that are needed to provision the infrastructure as well as configure the infrastructure. So the two key things that we talked about is server provisioning and configuration. So in terms of server provisioning, a lot of it has to do with runbooks. Now, runbooks is a term that we've borrowed, or let's say it evolved from the era of traditional IT server management, where runbook was really a set of scripts or a set of steps that needed to be performed when a problem happened in production. So for example, if the SQL Server instance was running out of storage, then the runbook said, log on to the SQL Server box, truncate the logs, validate that the logs have been truncated, and then that's your problem solved. So that was a runbook. And in certain organizations, people went to extents to create a script that will execute these steps that are required. But what Azure Automation gives you is being able to create these runbooks right from within Azure, at the same time leverage the open ecosystem that is surrounded Azure Automation. Now, Azure Automation doesn't introduce a new language. It's not a new platform. It's not something you need to go off and learn. If you're an IT administrator familiar with PowerShell, then Azure Automation is just built on top of that. Azure Automation is PowerShell and more, where all your PowerShell scripts, all your PowerShell skills can just be deployed right from day one. What it also allows you to do is operate and monitor. What that means is when your runbooks are triggered and they're executed, uh, you're easily able to track their success, their failures, if there are failures, why they failed. It integrates across the cloud and across different clouds and across on-prem. Um, the other thing that we talked about is configuration. Now, configuration is like we talked about in the previous video. It's all about managing the state. So what Azure Automation gives you is an engine for managing the desired state. Now, again, as I said in the previous video, we have a section where we'll go into a lot of detail on desired state management, and I will defer this topic until then. But I just want you to take two key things away from this slide. One, that Azure Automation is not just the Azure automation solution. It's a solution that's hosted within Azure that will allow you to automate across multi-cloud, on-prem, and hybrid scenarios. What it will also give you is a robust platform that can scale on demand as you scale your business. So a lot of talking. Let's go into a demo. What we'll look at in the demo is an introduction to creating Azure Automation account. And while we're at it, discuss some of the best practices when creating Azure Automation account. And then we'll do a whistle tour of some of the features of Azure Automation. All right, so let's get started. All right, so we're in the Azure portal now. If you don't have an Azure portal, if you don't have an Azure subscription already, you can sign up for the free subscription on azure.com. Now, I'm using a subscription here, logged in with my ID. As you can see, I've got access to multiple directories, but I'm just going to use this training directory that I've created. So as you come into the portal, you would see on the left there, you have a section for more services. Click on this section and search for automation. And if that's something that you're going to be accessing quite a bit, then it might be worth marking it as favorite, in which case it starts to show up on the left panel. So let's go into the automation account. Now, I've got a bunch of automation accounts that I'm already using, and you might find in your organization that automation accounts are already in play. Now, what you have to remember is automation accounts are really subscription limited. So within this subscription, I create an automation account. I can only use it to access the resources within this subscription. The other thing you need to remember is that there's a limit of 30 automation accounts in every subscription. So if you wanted to create 31, well, you need to create the other one in another subscription. The automation accounts are, in a way, giving you the ability to programmatically access the Azure resources. And that means if you accidentally gave that access away to someone else, then they would pretty much have access to all the resources within your Azure subscription. And it's because of this reason that in order to create an Azure Automation account, you need to be a subscription administrator. You don't need to be a subscription administrator to run the Azure Automation account, but just the process of creating the Azure Automation account needs to be carried out by a subscription administrator. Now, since I'm the administrator for this subscription, I'm simply going to go in and click the Add button. While you could call the Azure Automation account anything, how about calling it Joe had a good day? But when you come back to this automation account in a month's time, it's not going to mean anything to you. So what I would recommend is following an approach which is easy on someone else using it, or just on you as you come back in a few months' time trying to figure out why the automation account was created. So for this demo, I'm going to call it IAC Training 08. Now, another thing that I kind of ask people to use in their naming convention is the location that they're creating the Azure Automation account in. And the benefit of doing that is the automation account that you're creating should be used to automate the resources that are within the same location where that automation account is. There's nothing stopping you from using an automation account which is in location A to work with resources that are location B, but you may notice latency. And why take that latency challenge up when you can always create an Azure Automation account in the same location? So in this case, I'm creating the automation account in West Europe. I'm going to have that reflected in the name. And then just in the end, put the name auto. And I'm going to create this automation account in its own resource group. And I'm going to postfix that with the keyword RG, West Europe. Now you see an option here, create Azure Run As account. You don't necessarily need to create a Run As account. If you're going to use Azure Automation to run IT operation processes by creating runbooks, that do not need to interact with the Azure infrastructure, then you could choose this option as no, in which case no run as or programmatic access to Azure resources gets provisioned as part of the Azure automation account. But in this case, we're going to create some scripts that will interact with Azure resources. So I'm going to turn this option as yes. OK, well, let's click the golden button and wait for the Azure automation account to provision. As I get redirected back to this screen, you can see in the notification section that I get a message telling me that the deployment for this process has started. I can click on the notification icon there and keep up to date on the status changes of as the account gets provisioned. Meanwhile, I'll just click refresh, and we can see that it's starting to show up in the automation account list. I also see the notification that the deployment of this account is completed now. So let's click on it and go through some of the settings of the automation account. As you can see in the Essentials section here, the automation account has been created in its own resource group. It's not fixed in the sense if you wanted to come back to it later and decide to move the automation account in another resource group, then you can do that right from within the Azure portal and don't need to go to PowerShell to do it. Simply select an alternate resource group and you can move it into the other resource group. You see some other information as to what location it's deployed in, what subscription it lives in, who created it, when it was last modified. Scrolling down to the properties section, you will see the same set of information. Now, I want to show you the Run as Accounts section under the account settings. As you can see, the Run as Account has been provisioned both for Azure Resource Manager as well as Azure Classic. So in your organization, if you are still using the Azure Classic, as in the Azure Service Manager, Azure V1 as it's also called, and you have some assets there that you want to automate, then you can use this Run as Account to integrate into the Classic portal to do your automation. Let's click on the Azure Run as Account. What you see here is that a certificate has been provisioned. And it's this certificate that authenticates with the rest of the Azure resources when it's interacting with them. Now, this certificate has an expiry date, and that's just so that you don't end up creating an account and forgetting about it and someone misusing that certificate. The renewal process is fairly straightforward. You get notified before the certificate expires, and you can come back and renew it right from within here. The other thing as a best practice that I would advise is when you create an automation account, that you lock down the set of people that have access to it. And the benefit of having the automation account within the Azure portal is that you have access to the RBAC roles. The RBAC roles allow you to set up the permissions on who can access these automation accounts. At the same time, you also have permissions available within Azure Automation to say which resources it can operate in. So say, for example, if you only wanted to give it permission to certain resource groups, which are in dev or in test, then you can optionally do that as well. The one thing that I would advise is under the settings section, you have locks. So once you reach a point with your Azure Automation account where you have created scripts that you don't anticipate will change, then you could add a delete lock. Let's see what this does. So I'm going to add a delete lock and click OK. If I come back here and click the automation account, and bear in mind I'm the subscription administrator, and click delete, then it queues a request for deletion, but that deletion request fails. Now, if I tell you that you're going to accidentally delete your Azure Automation account or any of the assets you create within Azure, you might giggle a little bit. But this happens all the time where administrators have way too much permission, and in an effort to clean stuff up, you accidentally end up deleting stuff that you didn't mean to. So putting a lock on your Azure Automation is a good way of protecting it accidentally being modified. So we're going to go back into the Azure Automation account, remove the lock, and look at a few more settings. So just click here, delete the lock. Now, the account, when it gets provisioned the first time, gets provisioned as part of the free usage tier. And in the freemium model, you get about 500 job minutes free. What that means is Every time you run a runbook or from within Azure Automation, you get up to 500 minutes of free usage for execution of those runbooks. You also get about 5 free nodes that can be associated to the DSC pull server. But once you exhaust that and you want to use it, for more enterprise reasons, you can obviously come in and change the pricing tier. I'm going to use the basic tier in my demos because, as you can see, I've clearly exceeded the limit for this month. The other thing to highlight here is keys. As you can see here, I have got a primary key, a secondary key, and a URL. So if I wanted to use Azure Automation from outside the Azure portal, as long as I had access to this full URL, as long as the primary access key, I could trigger Azure Automation from outside Azure portal as well. So you would find in organizations that someone creates an automation account and it starts to work really well for them, and then they want to create it for other business units or other projects, uh, then someone has to do it manually. But the benefit of doing this from the Azure portal is once you provision an Azure automation account, the automation script gets self-generated for you. So if I click on automation script, you will be able to see that the PowerShell command to spin up a new instance of Azure Automation has been created for me. So I could just take this, refactor it a little bit, maybe parameterize it further, and then I could just run this from PowerShell to create more Azure Automation accounts for myself. Okay. One more thing I would like to show you here is source control integration. Now, we're talking about this DevOps way of working, right? And if you're creating automation that's not backed by a version control, then it's not really DevOps. And in that spirit, Azure Automation integrates with GitHub, which is a very famous Git hosting solution. So if you click on source control and you click on choose source, you see there's an option to integrate with GitHub. So in this case here, I've got a GitHub repository that I own, and it's got some runbooks in it that I've created in the past. If I just wanted to integrate this pre-existing repository that has runbooks with my Azure Automation account, then I could just do that by going into Azure Automation, clicking on GitHub, and then authorizing. In the process of authorizing behind the scenes, an OAuth token gets generated using the same ID that I'm logged into GitHub. All happening seamlessly in the background. You don't need to generate tokens and save them and key them in yourself. Um, then it gives me the option of selecting the exact repository that I want, the branch. And the benefit here is you might be creating your automation in one branch, and now you might want to make some changes to it. So you may create another branch to do the changes. But all the automation that exists in the original branch that is connected to Azure Automation does not get impacted as you're experimenting with new features in a separate branch. So come back here, and then it says, what path does it need to look for? Now, I've got a folder path here. I can key it in and click OK. At this point, as I click OK, it's behind the scenes going to integrate with GitHub, pull down all my PowerShell runbooks, and make them available in the runbook section within Azure portal. Right. So, we had a quick walkthrough of the Azure portal. We talked about some of the best practices, some of the limits, the level where the Azure automation resides, and some of the best practices in setting it up. We also looked at some of the settings, and the important thing is integration with source control.